the US is still the dominant global economic power. However, China is expected to overcome America in terms of nominal GDP in 10 years. What will happen when China's GDP surpasses the US? Great powers use culture and narrative to create soft power that promotes their national interests. As China continues to grow, does it suffer a soft power deficit that will be difficult to overcome? The number of people in China over the age of 65 soared to 11.4% of the population in 2017. By 2050, 1 in 4 Chinese will be over 65 years old. Will an aging population become China's Achilles heel? Many experts say China and the US are doomed to compete in the Asia-Pacific region.
Let's say China in a trade deal. They kill us.
Is the Pacific Ocean big enough for both countries?
A remark by Hu Angang, a professor from Tsinghua University, has raised much controversy in China recently. He says, China has already surpassed the United States in terms of economy, science and technology, as well as the overall national strength. However, critics note that China ranks only 27th out of 137 countries in the 2017 to 2018 edition of the Global Competitiveness Report published by the World Economic Forum. In the science and technology race, the US tops the list, followed by the UK and Japan. China didn't even make it into the top 20. So how should we consider questions of relative strength? What is a genuine assessment of China's comprehensive national power, and how should a rising China adapt to its new status and the mounting challenges that come with it? To discuss these issues and more, I'm happy to be joined in the studio by by Anna Tangen, our regular commentator and author columnist. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. Anna, what do you make of this report by Professor Hu Angang from Tsinghua University?
Actually, I'm a little bit surprised. I mean, it's not in line with what was being discussed at the last Party Congress, the 19th Party Congress, when they were talking about qualitative as opposed to quantitative measures.
But size does matter.
Size does matter, but it's also a drag. I mean, it's harder to move a big object than it is a small object. And China has still a long way to go. I think when Xi Jinping is talking about pollution and poverty, he was very clear, and the fiscal issues that are there, he was very clear that China has a long way to go, that it's at a very sensitive period in time, and that this is not the time to be declaring victory. I mean, everything he has indicated is that it will be a society that grows together. Now, if you start looking at the statistics and you look at GDP per person, China is under 9,000 US dollars per person. The US is at just under 60,000 US dollars per person. You push that forward a little ways.
We are no match for the per capita to see.
No, on the other hand,
the comprehensive competitiveness.
I can understand his pride. There have been a number of things, especially in e-commerce, manufacturing, a increasingly sophisticated technological development and innovation, areas like quantum entanglement that is being used for communication and things like this. These are things to be proud of, but I think it might be overstating the case and particularly not in line with what China is trying to broadcast.
China is accused of being overconfident. Having said this, the growth rate of 6.9% of GDP of 2017 did bring about a lot of predictions. For example, some people would say it will be easier for China to have the corner overtaking in the age of digital technology. Do you think this will enable China to develop fast and put our country into the faster lane?
Well, China has grown because of planning, and that's quite frankly it. I mean, the government sees that there's a need or an area that has to be improved in, and they do everything they possibly can. And quite frankly, the Chinese government, as a command economy, has the ability to shovel resources and to make plans that are not available to more traditional democratic Western powers. So that is China's strength and the ability to focus on what is coming next.
Excuse me. You used a command economy conceptually, and that's controversial because China was after all admitted to the WTO in the year 2001, and that means a lot of the factors of the market have been accepted as international and market forces. Whether China is accepted as a market-oriented economic status or not, market does play a key role. And you say that China is a command economy. Why?
The reason I say a command economy is because a lot of it is at the direction under control. Now, I'm not putting it in the kind of negative terms that are often used on that. There are pluses and minuses. What is important to understand is how much progress China has made by using planning as opposed to just letting the market kind of dictate things.
You have read very carefully the working report of both Premier Li Keqiang and the keynote presentation of President Xi Jinping. In these cases, they all said that what we do here in the market is the Chinese or market economy with socialist characteristics. They don't say this is central planning any longer.
Well, it's fine, as I said, you can parse words and terms and things like that, but I think you have to get to the root of this, is that, and I would explain it to most people, as there's this big hand and the invisible hand. The big hand is government, which is guiding the markets, and that is clearly a central authority. And Xi Jinping has put that into his anthologies of his essays that he's republished on the governance of China. The invisible hand is the market, which is necessary to create efficiencies, to give people the incentive to do that. But it still must be within a framework. And this is where I think China and the Western, traditional Western democratic capitalist powers differ, in the sense that they believe the market can solve all things. If you start...
The non-public sector of the Chinese economy provides up to 90% of the job opportunities in the Chinese market if you look at the vibrancy and dynamics of BAT, Baidu, Alibaba, and Tencent. Now, these are the core of the driving force behind the a market that is based on the digital technology. When we look at the GDP per capita, China doesn't rank first, second, or even 50th. Does the size of GDP reflect the size of a country's power? On what criteria can we define national power?
Well, GDP is kind of an old firm. It's
outdated?
It's completely outdated. I mean, GDP was invented when something that was made in your country came from your country, because there was no global supply chain. Today we have overlapping global supply chains. I often use the Apple phone, which is, yes, it is put together in China, but the entire value out of the $1,000 Apple phone, there's only $147, which actually accrues to China. But when it's measured and taken as an export, it's sold at, it's counted against China as $1,000. So these are the types of things which are not things. Many of the components are from other places in Asia, Taiwan, South Korea, even Vietnam now. So this idea of GDP is, well, I mean, to give you an example, at Davos today, the head of Lloyd's of London, this was the original conservative capitalists creating the insurance market, said, it is an outdated thing that is too often used. It does not mean anything. So you have even the capitalist side saying very clearly that things like GDP are out. The things that are important today are jobs, disposable income, productivity. These are the true measures of an economy. But we're still, unfortunately, talking in classical economic terms.
For several years running, the Chinese government has been able to provide at least 10 million jobs each year to live up to the demand and expectations of university graduates in their thousands each year. So when you use jobs as one of the yardsticks to gauge China's competitiveness, China is not trailing far behind. And congratulations on the job market in the United States at the same time. And President Trump does deserve credit for this. Somehow, 2018.
I would argue with what
I know you disagree. You're not a fan of Donald Trump.
Jobs. This is no. What you're hitting on is an absolute crucial difference. Government in the United States, I was in politics, all right, does not create jobs. What we can do is cheerlead all right, and the long-term effects of coming out of the recession and things like that, it takes quite a while for any kind of policy to work its way through the system, especially in the U.S. So Donald Trump is really benefiting from things that happened in the person he hates probably the most, Obama's administration. But he can claim credit for it. This is what politicians do.
Thank you so much. You're watching Dialogue with Anna Tangen. When we come back, we'll be joined by Victor Gao-Jikai, the current affairs commentator. He's a Chinese, by the way, to balance the perceptions of Anna. Stay with us, please. Welcome back. Both the Pentagon and the White House have listed China as a strategic competitor. It's just one word short of mentioning China as a geopolitical rival. That goes back to the Cold War. But let's put this aside. Victor, welcome to Dialogue, by the way.
Thank you.
Threats to global trade may also begin to materialize. I'm talking about trade protectionism. The U.S. has just slapped steep tariffs on foreign washing machines and solar panels. The tariff of 30% on foreign solar panels is a blow for China, obviously, the world's biggest supplier of the product. How much impact will that have on the Chinese economy, which is not called a market economic status?
First of all, trade protectionism is not going to help the United States in any meaningful way. Eventually, it will be very mutually destructive, and China most likely will need to retaliate. And for solar panel, the more the U.S. imports, the more solar power it can generate, and eventually it's a good thing for the United States to be more involved in solar power generation. Therefore, I think the United States will need to be more philosophical about solar power. China and the United States and several other countries need to strengthen their cooperation in solar power so that the mankind as a whole will need to benefit.
There's no doubt China's been very evasive about the trade war. However, who will be the winner of a trade war?
Nobody. The U.S. has imperiled 23,000 jobs just with the solar things, because most of the industry there was people who were actually installing and maintaining them.
As for global leadership, we are talking about soft power, hard power, global leadership, center stage of world economics or politics. Now, the key phrase in Davos at this moment is global leadership, despite the divided globe and the divided world in the post-West, post-order, post-truth world. Much of the debate focuses on the size of the Chinese economy relative to the U.S. economy or issues of military might. Issue is, Victor and Anna, what about innovation, which is a key driver for per capita income growth and an important determinant of military and diplomatic leadership? 70 laureates of the Nobel Prize live in the United States, and among the 20 best universities, 17 are located in the United States. Now, this fact alone says China is way, way behind the United States in terms of soft power, to say nothing of assuming global leadership. Well, of course, the developing countries and industrial nations may hold different perceptions about the so-called leadership of the world. What do you think?
Well, first of all, I think in terms of innovation, there is no doubt that the United States right now is ahead of China, and China need to strengthen its commitment to innovation and creativity. There's no doubt about it, and I think most people in China are fully aware of that. However, in terms of measuring the size of the Chinese economy versus the U.S. economy, it could be a very complicated thing. China is ahead of the United States in quite several aspects already, and in terms of the overall strength of China versus the United States, I think we also need to be philosophical in the sense that regardless of which country is bigger or smaller, we need to do the right thing. And if the bigger country, for example the United States, is not doing the right thing,
the bigger country or a stronger country,
or bigger or stronger country is not doing the right thing, is not promoting globalization and the free trade, for example, then it's actually doing more harm to these globalization and free trade.
You talk about how to be more philosophical in our interpretation about national strength. What is the most important index for measuring the soft power?
So I believe education, but aspirational. The question is, there are countries around the world who are looking to come up to make the things. Are they looking more at the U.S. and the European models, or are they looking more at China's model? And I'd say categorically all of the developing nations and most of the emerging nations are looking more towards China at this point. That is your soft power.
But the soft power of the social power of the United States may have been compromised, allegedly, by the regional conflicts. And look at the liberation of Iraq and the bloody war in Afghanistan, which is still going on. Do you think the virtues of the soft power, the glow of it, may have been seriously compromised due to the gunboat policy? I mean, we talk smart about soft power. However, what about the casualties, the body bags, the civilian casualties of the country that's being invaded?
I think regardless of how we measure the U.S. economic or military power, the U.S. leadership or the perception of the U.S. leadership in the world has been diminished significantly over the past several years, especially over the past year since President Donald Trump became the U.S. president. And I think this is probably irreversible, at least during President Donald Trump's presidency, and future presidents and future U.S. governments need to really size up the situation and reverse the damage already done to the U.S. global reputation and esteem. Otherwise, it's going downhill.
I mean, that sounds fine, Victor, but the fact is it's a democracy, and Donald Trump is a symptom of a group of people who feel that they have been bypassed by rich elites, the kind who are meeting in Davos right now, trying to determine the fate of the world. That is the unfortunate truth. These people did not benefit, were stamped down during the 2008-2009 crisis. Their incomes did not rise. They were looking for a populist hero to do it. Unfortunately, as you point out, I don't know that Donald Trump is the one who's going to help them.
Let's take a second look at the hard power, the military build-up. Well, we've heard that the defense budget would be put at $700 billion US. That's more than the rest combined the world over for the United States. The U.S., on the other hand, occupies the upper tier in the global defense industrial technology. I'm not talking about military-industrial complex, a phrase that was coined by Eisenhower in the 1970s. China currently languishes in the lower parts of the second tier, with a little capacity for designing and producing relatively advanced conventional weaponry. How vulnerable is China's defense industry?
Well, I think, of course, the U.S. overall military power is stronger than the Chinese military power. However, when we are talking about, for example, self-defense of China, I think Chinese military power is strong enough and sufficient enough to achieve that goal. And therefore, for example, if the United States has, let's say, 10,000 warheads versus, let's say, in the Chinese case, several hundred warheads, and if you can destroy the world 100 times versus if you can really retaliate with one or twice the capacity, I think you cannot say which power is stronger or weaker. I think we need to promote peace. That's the fundamental thing.
In fact,
and China can defend its...
The spokeswoman of the Chinese Foreign Ministry, Hu Angang, said clearly at the press briefing that for decades China pursues peacemaking foreign policy or defense policy that's becoming increasingly proactive in defending the territorial waters and territories of the Chinese mainland. What do you think of the posture of the Chinese Foreign Ministry in its response to the paper of the Pentagon?
Well, I'm glad we're not going to debate the whose button is bigger situation. But quite frankly, China is in an awkward situation. It ranks in the low 100s in terms of the number of resources per person. So therefore, it has to bring resources in from abroad. And it's a big exporter, so therefore it has to keep the lanes open. This fallacy that somehow China would want to or could somehow create a bottleneck in the South China Seas, prevent trade, which is his lifeline, would be like saying, you know, China's in danger of committing suicide. It's just not rational. But in order to, as the trade grows, as the Belt and Road grows, China has to have its sea lanes clear. It's obviously going to continue to have a military presence. But you know, this issue of gunboat diplomacy, in the end, it's economies that win overall. It's not militaries.
Exactly. According to a report by the U.S. National Science Board, The U.S. led the world in R&D expenditures with a 26% share of the global total, and China was a decisive second at 21%, as China is ascending the global R&D center stage. Now, the next issue, Victor, is aging population. China is getting old before it gets rich. This is a popular saying that characterizes the embarrassment that this generation of the Chinese leadership is facing. For example, by the year 2050, out of 4 Chinese will be above the age of 65. That means a big drag on economic sustainability, right?
Absolutely. I think the demographic situation China is faced with is a very daunting challenge. And this is mostly because the Chinese government has been promoting the one-child policy for almost 4 decades, and the population structure has been artificially disoriented in a sense. So I think the Chinese government...
Even after the Chinese government has relaxed its birth control policy, the young couples refuse to give birth to more than one.
I couldn't disagree with you more. I love you, Victor, but the fact is...
you don't have to make
you don't, you know, this idea, this classical idea, just like gross domestic product, GDP, this idea that you have to have labor in order to grow economies is a fallacy. We already have studies by Oxford University, by McKinsey, saying that somewhere between 46 and 51% of all existing jobs will be replaced by technology. We actually are in a situation where the economic growth is going, 3/4 of all buying decisions over the next 15 years will be done by people who are existing today. This is a turnaround from the past when new populations were driving the growth curve. You know, look to a future where fewer people are consuming more. Look at the United States, 4% of the world's population, yet we consume, what, 23% of the world's resources overall. This is not something where you have to have more people, especially those who are in poverty. We already have huge problems with the Gini index, the number of people who are being sidelined.
I believe those who are mired in the paradigm of who will be the upper hand in the dogfight, the United States or China, this is a matter of a zero-sum game. I mean, this is a Thucydides' trap. Does it matter for you to draw such a comparison?
No, I think at present China and the United States are the 2 largest economies in the world, and probably the 2 most important military powers in the world. There is no doubt about it. The key, I think, is not whether China or the United States is bigger than the other. The key, I think, is whether China and the United States can deal with each other with respect and deal with each other as partners. If China and the United States cannot get along and need to fall apart, for example, or even degenerate into a confrontation against each other, then there will be no world peace. And we need to really emphasize this point, peace and partnership between China and the United States.
I think it's a massive mistake to be assuming that the world is between 2 powers. We have a multilateral situation.
We have India waiting in the wing, we have the European Union,
Russia,
which is ambitious
you have South America,
assume leadership in the multi-power center world.
It would be absolutely zero-sum if you go back to this Cold War mentality where you have 2 ideologies and nations facing off against each other and trying to get everyone to decide on their side. The fact is, the Belt and Road, this kind of initiative is about inclusiveness, creating more economic opportunity through physical connections. This is not the kind of stuff where you want to get into this Cold War mentality.
Power politics aside, gentlemen, let's take an insightful look into why professors and scholars like Hu Angang from Tsinghua University have been keen on promoting the theory and discourse. Look, we are stronger, we are bigger, we are smarter, we are ahead of the United States and other major industrial powers. Why are they so confident? I mean, I would prefer to use self-inflation instead of confidence, and the Western media would tend to say, oh, these guys are assertive.
No, I think Professor Hu Angang is a distinguished expert. However, I think whenever we talk about economics, economics is all about assumptions. And I think Professor Hu Angang has been using major assumptions which need to be really validated. And using different assumptions, you come up with very, very different conclusions.
Gentlemen, don't forget the people like Hu Angang who is director of the National Conditions Research Center of Tsinghua University. University, which is compared to a combination of both Princeton and Harvard in the United States. I mean, it's a prestigious university, yet such a symbolic flagship person of the Chinese MIT went as far as to suggest that while way ahead of the United States, we have already entered into the center stage. President Xi Jinping says clearly that we have never been so close to the center stage, and yet this guy says we are already into the center stage. Why? Why
well,
this,
you have growing nationalism
this
in China.
issue of self-inflation?
There's growing nationalism within China and around the world, and there is a certain amount of pride. But taking it too far, I mean, following the example of Donald Trump in making all sorts of idle boasts, I don't know what that means. It shows a lack of confidence. If you are in fact the strongest power in the world, you don't have to proclaim that. You simply go about doing your business.
Do you think there's currently the undercurrent of bootlicking? I mean, to PMRP to submit positive reports to please your boss and in the hope of being promoted. I mean, I'm not talking about Professor Hu Angang, who must be a decent gentleman. I'm really worried about the undercurrent psychologically.
No, I think professors and economists are entitled to their own academic freedom, and they can come up with whatever conclusions they may want to announce. But China as a country, and the Chinese government as a government, and the Chinese people as a people will be better advised if they are not complacent, and if they are still modest and humble, and if they do not boast about being the #1 in the world ahead of the United States in all these categories. I think we need to live with the fact that both China and the United States, for the foreseeable future, will be the two biggest economies and probably the two most important powers on the global stage. While I agree many other countries are also very much, rushing forward, and the world we live in is a multilateral world.
And the other thing is, I mean, Confucian values, you never boast. And this is a very strange departure. It's a sense of humility and not putting it out there. Even Deng Xiaoping was, true to this. He says, don't, you don't have to throw your light out there. Hide it under a basket. Do well for yourself.
And we should learn from the United States about its mistakes. We should avoid repeating the mistakes of this superpower, given the complacency after defeating the Soviet Union with the end of the Cold War. Well, we have a lot to say about why most in China prefer to be the second best. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.